Welcome everyone to this special edition of Charity Chats during Trustee Week, where we're celebrating all the work, efforts and energy that you bring to your positions as charity trustees. Of course, Trustee Week is 1 week and we are with you all year round, which I hope you enjoy, and very happy to receive any feedback on that for the company we give you during the seasons. So today's special edition, I'm joined as usual by my colleagues, James Saunders from Moore Kingston Smith and Charles Mosquita from Quilter Cheviot. We have got a mixed bag as usual this week, lots to talk about in the sector. To begin with, I'm going to start with fossil fuels and the campaign that's been started by NCVO. It's a little bit of a mouthful, so let me consult my notes, but this is around highlighting progressive and responsible investment companies who have excluded fossil fuels from their investment solutions. So this is a Fueling Positive Change campaign by NCVO to support a fossil-free future. So now I've got my teeth in. Charles, I'm going to come straight to you on this one. What are your views on this latest development?
Yeah, I'm sort of slightly wondering what an umbrella body is doing, coming out with something quite so specific. I mean, we can we can talk about the divest and engage element of it and the pros and cons of that. I think all charities should know right about climate change and all the issues there, but to be, some of the language that they're using, and they've got this sort of thing where they talk about together we can support our sector to take charity money out of fossil fuels. But I think they miss a much bigger point, is that, if you effectively sell out, you lose any voice to influence any form of change. Now, that may be what you want to do, but also you can't just look at your investments in isolation. Surely you've got to look at your whole organization and what you're doing. So if you become fossil fuel free in your investments, how are you heating your buildings? How you, if you've got vehicles or anything, how are they being vehicles? Are you going to move completely to electric? Is electric the right answer for it? And I just think these things are much more complex. And I have no issues. I think that charities should certainly use their voice and use it loudly and ensure that their investment managers are using their voice loudly. But is the right way of completely selling out and disengaging, or is it actually you want to engage and you want to influence?
It's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
I thought the same point about who was saying it and what the message was, and was surprised on both fronts. James, I don't know whether you had any thoughts on this one.
Yeah, it seems that a lot of the evidence suggests that engagement and voting on these matters has declined very recently from those institutional investors, and it seems that a healthy chunk of that is that interested parties have, in some cases, just sold out to people who, don't really care about the environmental agenda, if you like. So it seems that it's counterproductive, really. All the protest votes, if you like, are now disappearing from the agenda. So yeah, I think Charles is right. You've got to stay invested, interested. You've got to be an interested party and have your voice heard. You have the right to do that as shareholders. So I would say stay invested and do something about it.
I think the other, sorry, Catherine, I think the other thing is that particularly the oil companies are going to be a massive part of the solution. Because if you look at it very simply, that their business model is busted over the last 30, 40 years. They get there as we transition over, but that transitional period, they actually have an awful lot of money that they could reinvest in if they want their businesses going. And the second thing I'll say to you is that, when we engage with companies like Shell, BP, or whoever it may be, you are holding management to account. You're saying to them, okay, what are your plans for that transition? And then each time they're coming in, you're saying, okay, how are you getting on with them, and holding them to it, and you're making sure that their remuneration is linked to it. So, I have to say, I do worry that this, to me, is just too simplistic. And I don't think if people could walk into this without realizing the consequences of what they're doing, where actually, if they feel passionate about it and it's important and it's in line with their objectives, then yes, they should definitely be engaging on all fronts.
I suppose there is also the impetus. It also needs to be with the investment managers and the the BPs and Shells of this world to even more communicate what they're doing to on the environmental front, because clearly it's not enough at the moment, especially on the investment managers side of things. If they have investors who don't see what they're doing, and we know, I'm perfectly conscious that these investment managers do know that they have to change and that they have to do something about this. They need to be putting that front and center, much more vividly in the eyes of the investors.
But I think people are. I mean, to be fair to the world of investment management, I mean, people are in different parts of that progressive moving towards. But certainly over the last 5 to 10 years, the engagement with companies on on the ES and G, the environmental social governance, has changed enormously. Because 20 odd years ago, when we'd have a company and you'd be talking about their finances, strategy, and everything else, there would be no conversations around the softer issues. Today, you're spending at least a third of a meeting on that, if not half, depending on.
Charles, I wonder how much investors know that, and particularly those with a bit more of a social conscience. Wonder how much they are told that. How it's, I would say, not enough. And the impetus has got to be with the investment managers to do more, because they are. It's obviously not getting it through at the moment.
Your problem, sorry, and I won't go, but your problem is that of course these conversations are ongoing. So there are very few that you have a start and an end and an easy, quick sort of story you can tell. So actually, these anger can be quite complex too in the way that you're doing it. So one of the things that the industry is struggling with of how to report it. One of the things I'm always suspicious of is when an investment manager goes, "Oh, well, here's the easy way to report, whatever it may be," because generally when you start questioning it, you find that isn't quite what it seems. So I agree with you. We need to get better at communicating, but again, we are also, part of this journey, which is extremely complex, and trying to take something that's complex and distill it into something that the owners of the businesses can really understand and particularly where you've got a big plethora of different businesses, all of them different aspects, that is quite challenging, and the industry is trying to address it, to be fair.
So let's talk communication. Having heard you both say this was overly simplified and having your voice heard, both of those things make me think of Twitter, or the platform formerly known as Twitter. Now we must X, mustn't we? But I think having your voice heard, also thinking about what you're saying and how you are saying it, and the importance of language and manners in civilized society. So this is the RSPB tweet referring to various government ministers as liars. I have to say, when I saw it reported, I did the instant little emoji of hand on face saying, "Oh, I can't believe you've done this." And I wonder if others in the organisation did the same thing. But it has had an interesting reaction, as it always does, in different sectors, whether that's in government, whether it's other charities, Charity Commission, and how charities conduct themselves generally. But James, whether you want to get in there first for this one, any thoughts?
I mean, I think a certain element of this is just, Twitter brings you down, doesn't it? You almost tweet according to your X, or rather according to your environment these days, and it's not a great place. I don't think it's a great place to be. Was it a mistake to make the tweet? Yes, absolutely. As a responsible charity, a large responsible charity, of course, you can't go around keep calling anyone liars, let alone members of parliament. Was it wrong? Yes. The trustee that then took back to Twitter and started, publicising his own views, or rather, criticising the charity, that shouldn't have happened either. You do it collectively, as a trustee board. So there's all sorts of mismanagement of how this went on. It was, a pretty sorry episode, really. In terms of the language point, I mean, we know that everyone's. The trouble with the language point is it's in the ears of the listener, if you like, the eyes of the reader. And as with all these electronic, it's the same principle with emails these days. You've got to think about how your message is going to be received on the other side, not just what you want to say. So yeah, I can understand that suddenly everyone wants to know about language, everyone wants to talk about language, and and start to look again at indeed the language they've used to describe the regulations or the advice that they give out.
Charles, did you
Yeah,
do this when you read it? That was
actually, yeah. I mean, it was unfortunate they used the word liars. I mean, unless they could prove they were liars, and that was it. And the real problem here is that we've all focused on the wrong thing.
yeah.
Because actually, the important thing is that government is appearing to change the regulation that they're going to require on house builders, and the RSPB and other environmental charities have come out very strongly that will be detrimental and goes against government policy. And they're trying to make that point and make it forcefully. I think the RSPB should be actually congratulated. I think they responded very quickly to rescind that and apologise. I can tell you, I'm sure politicians have been caused worse, haven't they? I agree with you. I think the bits that were worrying for me was one, the trustee going out on his own, and again that was being confused because he was linked to some conservative think tank, which actually wasn't part of the story. Actually, the real story was that he shouldn't have been going out making comments without having agreement with the rest of his trustees. And I suppose the final thing, which I find deeply depressing, was that there were two politicians who were demanding that the Charity Commission should strike the RSPB off. I mean, that seems to me very strong language. And I'm not sure, actually, the Charity Commission can strike them off. So that also shows a certain amount of ignorance on behalf of two MPs. And one would hope that they would be slightly better at a more informed tweet on the X platform. So I actually, in fact, it's probably raised the issue, and it's got much more publicity than they have. So in certain respects, it's probably delivered exactly what they wanted. So,
yeah.
But yes,
and I almost wonder if the Charity Commission might have been delighted with it, because they've issued their new social media guidance for trustees this week. So that's obviously hugely topical. And also the fundraising regulator has a consultation out where there's a bit of a discussion around whether they should be polite or professional, and that professional apparently seems to be a lower standard than being polite to people who are abusing you verbally. So I'm not quite sure whether we say politely go away, I don't know. So we're professionally telling them things. So yeah, I think this one might run and run, but there were a lot of thoughts around that RSPB situation. My final topic for today is around banking for charities. So recently we'd heard this with the Nigel Farage story about withdrawal of banking and how that was given such prominence. But actually, I do think there is a case here that charities are not being treated as well as they could and should be by the banking industry in the UK. And I've heard various anecdotal stories from clients of mine around the issues they have, either for opening accounts for new charities or keeping their account ongoing. James, I don't know if you want to come in at this point, and also about the work of CFG in relation to this.
Well, I mean, just on the bank's point, I've got clients, and they've been complaining for a year or so now about potential debanking, I think, or whatever that Mr. Farage was a victim of. It seems to me that the banks are very wary of any charity that has any links to anything overseas, particularly in areas that might be high on the AML regs lists, those sort of things. Anyone who's got trustees overboard or any operations overseas rather, it really suddenly they are hugely risk averse around continuing banking arrangements for these. I've had one client who had the bank has simply shut their account and sent them a check, and of course the knock-on effect in that case was that because that charity, UK charity, had had its bank account closed by one bank, they always had to disclose that to the other banks that they were applying to. And the moment you say, we've had our bank account closed by ABC, DEF aren't interested either. So they've got that particular charity got themselves in a real pickle. And anything unincorporated is the banks don't seem to understand them. They seem to be incapable of getting the evidence to get through the AML regulations. So that the moment they have to, reassess a charity, they're in trouble. So yeah, it's a real problem. I think it's a real problem, and I think it speaks to a lack of understanding, really, on the bank's part about exactly what especially unincorporated charities are and how they're constituted and what they mean.
Charles, anything to add?
Yeah, I just think the whole banking thing, I mean, over the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years, it does seem that banks increasingly don't want charities as clients. I'm sure I'll get a whole raft of people ringing me up and telling me they do. And the setting up of accounts, which it's not the banking industry is necessarily their fault, it's just the increased regulation and what their requirements are. And, James has used the word of risk. They want to minimize their risk. Why should they? And, charities aren't seen as particularly straightforward, particularly when banks are not UK owned, if you see what I mean. If they're particularly American, it also becomes, I think, a bigger problem because they don't understand the legal structures. So yeah, I've raised it with the Charity Commission. I've also raised it with CFG. I think that this is an area that definitely needs some work on. I also think there are some other more interesting options for charities, particularly if they've got deposits, but actually fundamentally day-to-day banking is a real nightmare, and they're getting fewer and fewer that actually really want charities as clients, as far as I can see.
It'd be interesting to see any comments, I think, after this session, whether that's the experience of listeners to this recording and whether others have any comments or observations on that. But I will draw things to a close today. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Charity Chats.